Welcome. In this video, we will explore what compassion is, drawing both from ancient Eastern traditions as well as what modern science tells us. If I ask you what compassion is, I would likely get a variety of responses. Some people may think that it is about being sad for others, while some may think that it is about helping others. Some others may think that suffering is like a virus that can spread. And if we are compassionate, we might get the virus too, that we become sad and also become overwhelmed. Related to this sense of overwhelmed is the belief that compassion is fatiguing, that it drains our energy. Some other people may think that compassion is soft and prioritize emotion first, and that if we are compassionate, we will not be able to make sound decisions. So in this talk, I would like to address several questions. What is compassion? Is it an emotion, a motivation, or multidimensional? Is compassion inborn? Is it trainable, or both? What is the difference between compassion and empathy? Why is compassion fatigue a misnomer? And why is compassion an endless source of joy, energy, and resilience? All major faith traditions cherish and value compassion. However, it is within Eastern traditions, such as Buddhist practices, that have developed an extensive set of mind training tools toward the cultivation of compassion. What is most fascinating is that in the last few decades, modern sciences have generated numerous evidence supporting the idea that compassion is both inborn and trainable. And this is based on three scientific principles. The first principle is neuroplasticity. Neuroplasticity means that the brain changes in response to experience and to training. This means that kindness and compassion can be cultivated in much the same way that we learn through repetitions, such as when we play golf or play the piano. In other words, when we nurture our minds to be more compassionate, we are changing and rewiring our brains. Another important scientific discovery is epigenetics. Epigenetics is the science of how our genes are regulated by influences that we encounter during our lifetime. And scientists have discovered that mental training induces epigenetic changes that help to promote compassion. The third principle is that every human being was born with basic goodness. This means that when we come into the world, we are born with a predisposition for prosocial behaviors. I want to show you a video of a study that shows that this inborn goodness can be seen even in very young infants.
In this study, parents bring their 6-month-olds into the lab.
At the other side of a long table is a hill stage. A red circle guy with googly eyes tries to climb the hill. He sort of goes up the hill and then falls back down. He always fails at it. Then a blue square character, also with googly eyes, comes from the bottom of the hill and bumps him up to the top of the hill so that he's successful. On different trials, the climber tries again to get to the top of the hill, and then a yellow triangle character comes down from the top and bumps him to the bottom of the hill, so prevents him from getting his goal. Babies see this a number of times until they get nice and bored with it. So we stop and basically do a choice measure. Moms are asked to close their eyes. An experimenter who did not see which character was which brings over the two characters to the babies and just sees which character the baby touches first.
Which one do you want?
We found that, impressively actually, almost 100% of babies preferred the more positive character.
What do you want?
Okay.
We can see that humans are born with basic goodness. However, how we actually behave depends on social context. When we are in a safe environment, it promotes prosocial interactions. In other words, when we feel calm and safe, we can be compassionate, kind, and selfless. However, when we feel unsafe, when we perceive threat, it elicits aversive behaviors, and we turn away become self-absorbed, selfish, or even cruel. So the key is to be able to establish a sense of safety and calmness by shifting away from threat through self-regulation before we can act pro-socially. The importance of self-regulation is demonstrated when we look at the 4 essential components of compassion that both Buddhist and Western sciences converge and agree upon. The first is attentional. It involves our capacity to be able to attend to the experience of others, to be present for others. Research has shown that we can train our attention so that it becomes more stable. And through training, we can also develop what scientists call meta-awareness. What is meta-awareness? It is knowing what our mind is doing, knowing where our mind is. For example, you might be reading a book and you're reading each word on the page. You read one page and then the next page. After a few minutes, you recognize that you have absolutely no idea of what you have just read. Your mind has wandered to somewhere else. And the moment you recognize that your mind has been lost, that's a moment of meta-awareness, when you become aware of what your mind is doing. The second component of compassion is affective. We feel into or empathize with the experience of others. However, when we feel or empathize too much with others' suffering, we can become overwhelmed and drained. That is why emotion regulation is key to transform our empathy into healthy empathic concern. The third component is cognitive. We look beyond our point of view and take on the perspective of others, trying to understand what they are experiencing. However, if we identify too much with others, we can become overwhelmed. That is why self-other distinction is important. It is the ability to see that although I care a lot about you, I'm also distinct from you. I am not you. The last component is intentional. Compassion, very specifically, is the intention to enhance the well-being of others and to lessen their suffering. Without intention, it is not compassion. And compassion is not only about people whom we love or who are like us. It is also fundamentally inclusive. We extend our kindness also to people who are different from us, people whom we dislike, as well as all beings, animals, plants, and our planet. Now that we have looked at the components of compassion, I want to draw your attention back to my previous point about self-regulation. If we take a look at the first 3 components, we can now see that if we are not able to self-regulate, we could perceive someone's suffering as a threat to our safety, which could lead us to protect ourselves by turning away rather than helping them. So whether we're able to self-regulate is important because it can lead to very different behaviors. When we witness another suffering, our empathy is aroused. If our attention is not stable, or if our emotion is not regulated, or if we merge ourselves with another too much, it leads to empathic distress, which we may perceive as a threat. When we feel threatened, we want to protect ourselves, so we may engage in self-focused actions, such as selfish prosocial behaviors. What are selfish prosocial behaviors? They are actions that aim primarily to relieve our own discomfort rather than another's suffering. For example, and I've seen it many times, when someone is crying, we might rush to give that person a tissue, which can be helpful. But often it is a reflexive response to make ourselves less uncomfortable, and sometimes even to discourage the person from crying. Self-focused behaviors also include fight, for example, being frustrated, flight by avoiding or abandoning another, and freeze or numbing responses as when we shut down emotionally. On the other hand, if we are able to maintain attention stability, regulate our emotion, and distinguish ourselves from others, then we feel safe and calm, so that empathic arousal can be transformed to healthy empathic concern, which leads to other focused behaviors in the form of compassionate motivation and prosocial action. How can we self-regulate better? Fortunately, we can improve self-regulation through mental training, and it can be broadly grouped into three major categories. The first is focused attention. Often the focus is on the breath, for example, paying attention to the rising and falling of the abdomen, because the breath is always with us. As we rest our attention on the breath, we may begin to notice that thoughts, feelings, or bodily sensations arise. The instruction is to release them gently but firmly and without judgment, and return our attention back to the breath. A second practice is open awareness. Here, we also allow our attention to rest to stabilize. But in this case, we allow whatever it is arising, thoughts, feelings, or sensations, to enter into an open field of awareness, but without letting these thoughts or feelings to capture our attention. And when they do, we gently but firmly bring our attention back to this open field of awareness. The third practice is lovingkindness and compassion, in which we send the wish for all beings to be happy and free from suffering. All beings here include not only our loved ones, but also strangers and people whom we may have difficulty with, as well as all creatures, animals, plants, and our Mother Earth. Mental training has been shown to produce many benefits. The first is increased attention stability. Mental training, especially focused attention, as when we focus on the breath, trains our ability to maintain a stable, alert, concentrative state. It requires us to recognize when distraction arises, disengage from the distraction, and reorient our attention back to the object. This stability is very important. We probably notice that we are distracted constantly in many different ways: texting, checking emails, entertainment, or advertisement. They keep us from focusing on what is important, yet having stable attention is crucial. For example, great athletes, surgeons, musicians all exhibit an extraordinary ability to focus their attention for long periods of time. So it is encouraging that better attention stability can be achieved through mental training. The second benefit is increased meta-awareness. That is, knowing what our mind is doing, knowing where our mind is. Meta-awareness also decreases mind wandering and our tendency to become upset when we ruminate about past events or worrying about the future. The third benefit is better perspective taking, and what some psychologists call decentering. To step outside of our immediate experience, to shift our perspective, thereby changing the very nature of our experience, and from there gain better insight into our mind and the nature of reality. The fourth benefit is better emotion regulation. It allows us to detect and monitor positive and negative mental states, to be more attuned not only to our own emotions, but also to those around us. Another important point here is that these four qualities are tightly linked. If our attention is not stable, we become easily distracted, which leads to our mind to wander. And when our mind wanders, it often leads to negative thoughts and brings up negative emotions. The relationship between attention, mind wandering, and happiness is beautifully demonstrated in a study of more than 3,500 people from around the world. At different points during the day, they received a text message which asked them 3 questions. The first question is, what are you doing right now? And they have to check off from a list of activities. The second question is, where is your mind right now? Is it focused on what you're doing, or is it focused on something else? And the third question is, how happy or unhappy you are right now. And what the scientists discovered is that people spend an average of 47% of the time not paying attention to what they are doing. What is even more instructive is that when people reported that they weren't paying attention, they were significantly less happy. This finding is aptly summarized in the title of this paper: A Wandering Mind is an Unhappy Mind. You might ask, how does mind wandering happen? Scientists discover a brain network called the default mode network that is responsible for mind wandering, which correlates with negative emotions. The question then is, how can we stop this involuntary mind wandering? Thankfully, there's another network called the attention network that can deactivate the default mode network. Not only that, research has shown that mental training can rewire the brain. For example, with training, there is increased activity in the attention network, leading to more attention stability and meta-awareness. There's also a decrease in activity in the emotor of the brain, which leads to better emotion regulation. In addition, there is more connectivity between the attention network and the default mode network, which deactivates the default mode network and leads to less mind wandering. Not only does mental training rewire the brain, it also reduces our stress level. For example, one of the stress responses in our body is the release of stress molecules into the blood. These molecules are responsible for inflammation and have been linked to increased heart diseases. And we can measure these stress molecules by taking blood sample. In a study that looked at the effect of 3-day mindfulness training versus relaxation, it found that meditators had decreased stress molecules in the blood, even 4 months after training, which was not observed in people who had relaxation training. And I think this study is particularly important because it counters the common belief that mindfulness is just another relaxation technique. The results here clearly show that the reduction in stress molecules is only found in a mindfulness group and not in a group that received relaxation training. So mindfulness is not just another relaxation technique. Now, let's look at compassion training more specifically. Before we do that, we need to clarify the difference between compassion and empathy. Many times when people think about compassion, they think that it is exhausting. This is primarily because they have confused empathy with compassion. So clarifying these two terms is important. So what is empathy? Empathy refers to the ability to feel into the experience of others. Scientists classify empathy into 2 subtypes. The first subtype is affective or emotion empathy, which refers to shared feelings. The second subtype is cognitive, which refers to understanding the perspective of others. In fact, these 2 subtypes of empathy are identical to the second and third components of compassion. They are necessary to arouse compassion, but compassion differs from empathy in that it has 2 other additional components: attention component, when we attend to the experience of others, and most importantly, an intentional component, the wish for others to be happy and free from suffering. And it is these 2 additional components that differentiate compassion from empathy. Brain science also tells us that compassion and empathy are different because they lead to very different emotional states and behaviors by activating completely different brain networks. Scientists found that compassion training enhances positive emotion by activating the compassion network shown in purple here that brings about positive emotion such as joy, love, and peace. This network also gives us a sense of pleasure and reward, and enhance prosocial connection such as maternal bonding and romantic love. In fact, studies have shown that if we spend as little as 30 minutes a day for only 2 weeks to cultivate compassion, it is sufficient to rewire the brain and make the compassion network stronger and more active. In contrast, when we empathize with others' suffering, when we over-identify with them, empathy activates a very different network, the empathy network, shown in pink here, which is responsible for generating negative emotion, such as sadness, pain, and anxiety. Now we can see why compassion fatigue is a misnomer and should not be used, because compassion leads to positive feeling. It has a separate brain network that is distinct from empathy network, which generates negative feeling. Therefore, empathy fatigue and empathic distress are better terms to describe the emotion exhaustion and distress when we are too identified with others' suffering. One more important point is that research showed that intention alone, the wish for others to be happy and free from suffering, even in situations when we cannot do anything to fix their problems or alleviate their pain, can still lead to activation of the compassion network, which can bring us a sense of calm, ease, and peace. So instead of exhausting, compassion is actually an antidote to burnout and a source of energy and resilience. Compassion training also slows biological aging. How does that work? It is where epigenetics come in. There is a biological clock of aging in every cell of our body. At the ends of each chromosome is telomeres. Like the plastic tip at the end of our shoelace, as when we put on our shoes, they act as end cap to protect our DNA. However, they become shorter and shorter with each cell division and with aging. Thankfully, there's an enzyme in our body called telomerase that slows this age-related shortening of telomeres. In fact, the more telomerase, the better for health and longevity. And studies have shown that meditators have longer telomeres, more telomerase activity, and more telomere-related gene expression. So compassion training can also increase our longevity. I cannot emphasize enough that mental training is like physical exercise. We can read all about it or look up what kind of exercise is best, but without actually working out, without the physical repetitions, we will not build the muscles that we want. Mental training is the same. We have to set our intention to practice and to train ourselves. And not only that, just as we don't wait till we are sick to exercise, as it will be too late, we need to start now before challenges or catastrophes hit us. So I would strongly encourage you to check out the many apps that are available and start practicing now. Finally, it is my deepest wish that this talk will motivate you to cultivate compassion as a way of being, so that we can enhance our own well-being and build a gentler, more caring society together. If you want to explore the content of this talk further, you may want to check out my new book, The Art and Science of Compassion, a Primer, on which this talk is based. And I thank you for your attention.